The rain had teeth. It worried at the stones of the castle as if it wished to gnaw Hogwarts down to the bones, to pry the old place open and see what it had swallowed over 1,000 years. Vows and betrayals, laughter and screams, prayers muttered into pillows by children who had never learned the shape of sleep in a strange bed. Albus crossed the courtyard with his head slightly bowed, not from age but from intent, as if he could make himself smaller and less likely to be noticed by the night. His cloak dragged a thin, black ribbon of water behind him. The torch flames in their brackets bent and hissed. He felt each step up through the soles of his boots, felt the castle's pulse as one feels the heartbeat of a horse under saddle. Steady, patient, and too proud to show pain. In his left pocket, wrapped in a handkerchief that had belonged to no one but him, was a ring. It was heavy in a way that had nothing to do with gold or stone. It seemed to pull on the air around it, to make even the rain hesitate. The glove on his right hand was new. He could feel the damp trying to creep under its edge. Beneath leather, beneath linen bandages, his skin throbbed with a heat that was not warmth. It was a living ache, as if something venomous had been poured into his veins and was still searching for a heart to bite. He did not look at the towers. He did not look at the windows. The castle had eyes. It always had. Portraits, ghosts, suits of armor with the bad habit of moving when you thought them still. All of them had their own loyalties, their own curiosities. Albus's secrets were already too many to juggle without adding another. At the archway, a sudden flutter of red, Fawkes stepping into view. Feathers glossy as spilled wine even in the poor light. The Phoenix regarded him with an old measuring gaze that made Albus feel, absurdly, like a boy with mud on his hem. "I know," Albus murmured, barely loud enough for the rain. "I know." Fawkes did not scold. Phoenixes rarely did. The disappointment was quieter. The simple fact of being seen by something that loved you and could not save you from yourself. Albus touched the edge of the glove with his left fingers, careful not to press. He had always been good at being careful. It was his great flaw, as well as his greatest strength. Caution could be used to protect, yes, but it could just as easily be used to postpone the moment when you looked directly at what you had done. He passed through the doors and into warmth that smelled of old wood and older magic. The entry hall was empty. The hour was unkind to sane people. The castle's candles burned with their usual stubborn insistence, flames steady despite the drafts, as if the air itself had learned to obey. In the quiet, the ring seemed louder. Not with sound, with presence. He thought of a shack half collapsed in a tangle of nettles. He thought of a cracked window and the sour stink of old dust, and something fouler beneath it. He thought of the moment his fingers had closed around the ring and a tenderness had risen up in him like a tide, soft and irresistible. And the face he had not let himself see in years had seemed suddenly one breath away. Arianadot. He closed his eyes for half a heartbeat, as if the name itself could strike him. His step faltered. He corrected, smoothing it into the mild shuffle of an elderly man crossing a hall too large for its own good. Somewhere below, the lake shifted in its basin. Somewhere above, an owl cried, impatient at the storm. Hogwarts did not know what he carried, but it knew something was wrong. It always did, in the way an old dog knows when its master is sick. Albus did not go to his office first. He went down. The dungeon corridors held the cold the way a grave holds silence. Even in summer, they had a winter dampness to them, a slow seep that worked its way into bone. Albus descended without haste. Haste was for those who had choices. The door to the office opened at his approach, as if the room itself had been listening for him. There was no polite delay, no invitation, only the immediate razor-edged scent of potions and old herbs, and something metallic beneath it that reminded Albus unpleasantly of blood. Severus stood behind his desk, his posture already braced, as if he had been waiting for the blow. His eyes, black, sharp, flicked to the handkerchief in Albus's left hand, then to the glove. "You did it," Severus said, and it wasn't a question. His voice was low, threaded with contempt that might have been anger if it had warmed even slightly. Albus shut the door with a small motion of his wand. The latch clicked. The office became a sealed pocket of air, thick with steam and accusation. "I did," Albus agreed. There was no point in pretending otherwise. Severus had always been particularly good at smelling lies, as if deceit were another ingredient he could identify by scent alone. Severus strode around the desk. The hem of his robe whispered over stone. "Show me." Albus pulled off the glove. The skin of his right hand was darkened, the color of bruised fruit left too long on a windowsill. Black veins branched beneath the surface like roots searching for water. The fingers were stiff, swollen slightly at the knuckles. The pain, now exposed to cooler air, sharpened as if it had been waiting for permission. Severus's jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked less like a man and more like a blade forced to remember it had once been iron. "Idiot," he said softly, and then his hands were on Albus' wrist with startling gentleness that did not soften the word. "Absolute." "Severus," Albus warned. Not because he disagreed, but because his time was limited and Severus' rage, while understandable, would not stop the curse from spreading. Severus's fingers pressed against the blackened skin, not in comfort, but in assessment. His eyes narrowed. "This is not a common hex." "No," Albus said. "It is not." The ring lay on the desk now, still wrapped. Severus looked at it as if it were a viper under cloth. "You put it on," Severus said, voice thin with fury. "You knew." Albus did not answer immediately. He watched Severus' face and saw, in the tightness around his mouth, something he rarely let show. Fear. Not of death. Severus had made peace with death long ago, or at least had taught himself to live as if he had. This was a different fear. This was the fear of losing control. "I knew," Albus said at last. "And yet." "And yet," Albus echoed, his tone mild, as if they were discussing weather. He could not afford to let shame loose. Shame was a luxury that could drown a man. "I have never claimed to be wise in all things." Severus released his wrist abruptly, as if the skin burned him. He turned away, reaching for a cabinet. His movements were clipped, efficient, the motions of someone who refused to let anger slow his hands. "You wanted to see her," Severus said, not looking back. The office seemed to contract around the words. The jars on the shelves glittered. The candles hissed. Albus swallowed once. The pain in his hand pulsed as if in agreement. "Yes." Severus laughed without humor, a short, ugly sound. "Of course you did." He returned with a small vial of something thick and pearly, and a bowl of viscous black potion that steamed faintly, not with heat, but with cold. He set them down with the care one gives to explosives. "This will not cure it," Severus said, meeting Albus' eyes at last. "It will slow it. It will keep it from reaching your heart. If I am precise, and if you are obedient." Albus lifted an eyebrow. "Obedient is not a word often applied to me." Severus's mouth twisted. "Then try not suicidal." Albus extended his hand. The black veins seemed to shift, restless. Severus poured the pearly liquid over the skin. It stung like ice and salt. Albus's fingers clenched involuntarily. Severus caught his wrist again, holding him steady. His other hand moved, wand flicking through a sequence of motions so fast the tip blurred. The air thickened. Something unseen tightened around Albus' hand like a band. It was not gentle magic. It was the kind that held a screaming thing down and called it peace. Albus exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. He could feel the curse resisting, pressing against Severus's work with a cold insistence. He could also feel Severus's focus, absolute, unforgiving. It was like being pinned under a gaze. Minutes passed, or seconds. Time was a useless measure in the presence of pain and magic. Finally, Severus stepped back, shoulders rigid. Sweat shone at his hairline. His breathing was steady, but his eyes were even darker. "It is contained," Severus said. "For now." Albus flexed his fingers. The stiffness remained, but the heat had dulled into a constant throb rather than a knife. "Thank you," Albus said, and meant it. Severus's stare flicked to the ring again. "What is it?" Albus hesitated. Lies were brittle in this room. Severus would snap them in half with one look. "A hallow," Albus said quietly. Severus went very still. "Which?" "The stone," Albus replied, and watched the word land. Severus's face did not change much. It did not need to. Albus saw the reaction in the minute tightening of Severus's fingers, in the way his gaze sharpened as if he could cut the ring open with it. "No," Severus said. Albus tilted his head. "No what?" "No," Severus repeated, voice like steel pulled thin. "Whatever you are thinking, whatever you are planning to do with it, no." Albus's hand drifted, almost unconsciously, toward the wrapped ring. The ache answered, pulsing. "I have made no plan," Albus said, and found it was almost true. Severus's lip curled. "That is what frightens me." The staircase to the office unwound like a slow thought. The gargoyle leapt aside at the password without comment, though Albus fancied its stone eyes lingered on his bandaged hand. Inside, the warmth was gentler than in the corridors. The office smelled of parchment, ink, and something faintly sweet from the lemon drops he kept in a jar more out of stubborn habit than appetite. Silver instruments whirred and clicked on spindly legs, their little arms making patient circles as if they could measure the future with enough persistence. The portraits dozed. Some pretended to. The older headmasters had a talent for feigning sleep while listening with the devotion of eavesdroppers. Albus shut the door and laid the wrapped ring on the desk. For several breaths he did nothing but look at it. The handkerchief was damp around the edges from his pocket, the cloth clinging slightly to the ring as if reluctant to let go. He did not unwrap it. He could almost hear Severus's voice. No. It would have been comforting in a way, to simply obey. To hand the ring over, to lock it away, to declare it too dangerous and therefore someone else's responsibility. But Albus had built his life on dangerous responsibilities. The habit sat in his bones. Fox shifted on his perch, talons scraping softly. A low croon left his throat. Not quite song. More a question. Albus smiled faintly. "Yes, I know." Again. He crossed to the window and looked out. The rain had softened into a steady curtain. Lightning flickered far off, turning the lake into a sheet of hammered metal. The towers stood black against the clouds, solid and indifferent. He thought of the ring again, of the moment the stone had seemed to warm under his skin, like a heartbeat answering his own. He had wanted, with an almost childish violence, to see Ariana's face. Not as it had been in the last years, frightened, fragile, shadowed by what had been done to her, but as it had been before. Laughing, running through the grass. Alive in a way Albus had spent decades trying not to remember too clearly. He thought of his mother, of his father, of all the dead he had piled behind him like stones on a grave. The stone did not resurrect, he reminded himself. It did not return. It tempted. It offered an imitation so vivid it could break a man's ability to live with what remained. And yet he had not expected the curse. He had not expected either how the stone's pull lingered even after he had taken the ring off, like a scent caught in his hair. He turned from the window and faced the office again. The silver instruments continued their patient ticking. The portraits breathed softly in their frames. One portrait, however, was undeniably awake. Phineas's eyes were open, bright with the sharp amusement of someone who had been given a secret and was already considering what it might buy him. His long, pale face hovered in the shadows, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Back from gallivanting in squalor, are we?" Phineas drawled, his voice carrying the particular arrogance of someone who had never been forced to be kind. Albus approached the portrait, careful to keep his body between Phineas and the desk. "Good evening." "It's night," Phineas corrected, as if it mattered. "Then good night," Albus replied, unfazed. Phineas's gaze flicked to Albus' bandages. "You look dreadful. I suppose that is fashionable now?" Albus's smile did not reach his eyes. "Fashion comes and goes. Hogwarts remains." Phineas snorted. "Hogwarts remains because it cannot move, like a lump." He paused, head tilting slightly. "You smell of old magic." Albus's fingers tightened around his wand. The portraits he knew did not simply see. They absorbed sometimes the residue of what passed near them. Phineas had been a headmaster once. He had learned the value of noticing. "It is late," Albus said softly, "and I require quiet." Phineas arched a brow. "Do you command me, Albus?" Albus met his eyes and let a hint of his weariness show. "I ask you, as a courtesy." Phineas blinked, surprised. Then, with a theatrical sigh, he leaned back in his painted chair. "Very well. I shall be silent, for the sheer novelty of it." His eyes drifted closed. The smile remained, faintly malicious. Albus returned to the desk and sat. The chair creaked, a small complaint. He stared at the wrapped ring again until the handkerchief seemed almost to breathe. There were questions he had carried for years, questions too old and heavy to ask any living person, because no living person had been there when the castle was young. Questions about the foundations, about the choices that had shaped Hogwarts into what it was, about the very divisions that now let prejudice bloom like mold in damp corners. He had fought dark wizards. He had outmaneuvered ministers. He had made bargains with men he despised for reasons he could justify only in the quiet hours. But the school was meant to be steadier than war. If he was going to die, and his hand reminded him with every pulse that he might, then he wanted, at least once, to ask the ones who had built this place what they had intended. He drew the handkerchief aside. The ring sat in his palm like a small, ugly planet. The gold was tarnished. The black stone, no, not a stone, not truly. Something deeper, older, caught the candlelight and swallowed it. Albus's breath slowed. He did not put it on. Instead, he turned it between finger and thumb. Careful, deliberate, 3 times. The office changed without a single thing moving. The candles continued to burn, but their flames leaned inward, as if drawn toward the ring. The ticking instruments stuttered and then fell silent, caught in a hush so complete it felt like a physical pressure against Albus' ears. Even the rain at the window seemed to soften, as if the world outside had been pushed a step farther away. A coldness rose from the ring, sliding over Albus's skin like water poured from a deep well. It did not bite. It beckoned. He felt in that coldness the shape of longing. He had prepared, in quiet, not with elaborate ritual. Hogwarts disliked being told what to do, but with a series of subtle charms woven into the room like threads. A ward against eavesdropping. A ward against wandering portraits. A ward, most importantly, against his own weakness. A gentle counter-charm that would nudge his thoughts away from Ariana if they strayed. He hoped it would be enough. Albus lifted the ring to eye level. The black stone did not gleam. It drank. He focused his mind, not on a face he loved, but on a name etched into Hogwarts itself. Godric. Godric. The word formed in his thoughts like a bell beginning to ring. He turned the ring again, and the air in front of him thickened as if the office had filled with invisible smoke. The cold deepened. Fawkes made a low sound, a warning or a prayer. Albus did not flinch. He had seen ghosts before. Hogwarts had them like other castles had drafts. But this was different. Ghosts were choices, imprints left by souls too afraid to move on. What the stone offered was something else. A tether yanked hard enough to pull an echo close. The space by the desk darkened, not with shadow but with absence, as if color had been erased there. Then, slowly, the absence took shape. A man stood where there had been air. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair the color of iron threaded with gray, falling to his shoulders in a way that suggested he had never tolerated a barber for long. His clothes were not robes but something closer to a warrior's tunic and cloak, though the fabric was strange, old, heavy woven. A sword hung at his side, the hilt worn smooth by use. His face was weathered, the lines around his eyes deepened by laughter and strain alike. His eyes were bright, startlingly alive for someone who was not alive at all. He looked around the office, taking in the odd silver instruments, the portraits, the window glass, and his brow furrowed as if he had stepped into a dream that offended his sense of architecture. Then his gaze snapped to Albus, and his posture shifted, instinctive. A man ready to meet whatever had been thrown at him. "You," he said. His voice had weight. It filled the room without effort. "You are not one of mine." Albus inclined his head slightly. "No." The man's hand rested near his sword, not drawing, but reminding the world it existed. "Who are you? And what is this sorcery?" Albus's throat tightened. Speaking to the dead did not feel like triumph. It felt like standing on thin ice. "My name is Albus," he said, and forced calm into each syllable. "I am headmaster of Hogwarts." The man's eyes widened a fraction. His gaze flicked to the banners, Gryffindor's crimson and gold near the ceiling, and something like recognition softened the hard edge of his expression. "Hogwarts," he repeated, as if tasting the word after a long hunger. "Still standing?" "Yes," Albus said. "Because of what you built." The man's mouth twisted, half smile, half grimace. "We built stone and arguments. Children built the rest." Albus let the words settle. The stone's coldness pressed against his palm, urging, urging, urging. "I have questions," Albus said quietly. The man's eyes sharpened. "Questions? You drag me from death for questions?" Albus did not look away. "Yes." For a moment, the air seemed to hold its breath. Then the man's shoulders loosened slightly, as if he had decided that if this was a trick, it was at least an interesting one. "Very well," he said. "Ask." Albus swallowed. The first question was the hardest, because it was the one that admitted doubt. "What did you intend Hogwarts to be?" The man, Godric Gryffindor, though Albus did not speak the full name aloud, afraid of the way names could anchor, stared at him as if the question were a blade held at an odd angle. "A refuge," Godric said at last. "A forge. A place where children could become dangerous in the right ways." "No." "In the right ways," Albus repeated. Godric's eyes flicked to Albus' bandaged hand. "And in the wrong ways, too, if you are not careful." Albus's fingers tightened around the ring. "That," he said softly, "is precisely why I am asking." Godric moved first, not toward Albus, but toward the window, drawn by the motion of rain and lightning beyond. He reached out as if to touch the glass, then stopped, hand hovering a hairbreadth away. The gesture was strangely human, the instinct to test what you could not quite believe. "I cannot feel it," Godric said, more to himself than to Albus. "I see it. I hear it. But my fingers remember, and there is nothing there to meet them." Albus said nothing. He had no comfort to offer that did not taste like lie. Godric turned back, eyes narrowing. "This is foul magic." "It is old," Albus replied carefully. "And it is perilous." Godric's laugh was short and rough. "Perilous? You have a gift for mild words." Albus allowed the faintest smile. "It is perhaps a habit of mine." Godric's gaze swept the room again. "This office, these trinkets." His expression suggested a man who had never trusted a device he could not break with a hammer. "And you say you are headmaster. How many have come after us?" "Many," Albus said. "Some wiser than I, some less so." Godric's eyes flicked toward the portraits. "Those are headmasters?" "Yes." "And they watch you," Godric said, not as an accusation but as a statement of fact. "Even asleep." "They do," Albus admitted. "I have asked for privacy." Godric's mouth quirked. "Asked, not demanded." Albus's bandaged hand pulsed, as if offended by the idea of demanding anything from the dead. Godric stepped closer. The cold mist around him seemed to trail like a cloak. So, questions. You asked what we intended, and I answered. Now tell me why you need to know. Albus hesitated, because the truth was both simple and ruinously complicated. There is war again, he said. Godric's face hardened instantly, as if the word had snapped him into a different mode of being. Against whom? A wizard, Albus said. He felt the familiar weight of the name and did not speak it aloud. Powerful, brilliant, cruel. He believes in blood purity. He has followers. He has returned. Godric's eyes flared. So Salazar's poison has not died. Albus did not correct him. He did not have the heart to pretend the world was fairer than it was. There are children in this castle, Albus went on. Children who will be asked to choose sides before they understand what it means. Children who will be hunted for how they were born. Godric's jaw tightened. Then teach them to fight. Albus's gaze sharpened. That is what I am trying to avoid. Godric stared at him. Avoid? You cannot avoid a blade by closing your eyes. I do not close my eyes, Albus said more sharply than he intended. The office seemed to shiver with the sudden edge in his voice. But I have learned what happens when children are made into soldiers. Godric's expression shifted, the anger tempered by something like consideration. You have seen it. Yes, Albus said. And I have contributed to it. Godric's eyes softened, just a fraction. Then perhaps you are wiser than you look. Albus breathed out, slow. I want to protect them, and I want to understand whether Hogwarts, this system, these houses, helps or harms. Godric looked toward the banners again, the lion's crimson catching candlelight. Houses, he said, and the word sounded like an old wound. Albus watched him carefully. Did you ever regret dividing them? Godric was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, less like a sword, and more like a hand pressed to a bruise. We thought it would give them belonging, Godric said. We thought if we named their virtues, they would grow into them. Courage, wisdom, loyalty, ambition. His mouth tightened. And fear. Albus's heart gave a slow, heavy beat. Fear. Godric nodded once. Salazar feared what he did not understand. He feared the world beyond our walls. He feared change. And fear makes monsters of men who might otherwise have been merely unpleasant. The ring's stone warmed, impossibly, as if listening. Albus steadied his breathing. Tell me about Salazar, he said softly. Godric's gaze snapped to him. Why? Because he left something behind, Albus said. Something that still hurts children. Godric's face darkened. The chamber. Albus felt his stomach tighten. The word, spoken by someone who had known it when it was new, landed differently. He had heard it as legend, as threat, as tragedy. From Godric's mouth it sounded like the name of a grave. Yes, Albus said. Godric's hand clenched on his sword hilt. Then you are already too late. Albus held Godric's gaze. The chamber has been opened, he said, and felt the bitter taste of the past year rise like bile. It was opened some years ago. A creature within was released. A student died, long ago. It nearly happened again. Godric's face went stone still. A child died. Yes, Albus said, the word heavy as lead. Godric turned away sharply, pacing once, like a man caged. His boots did not strike the floor. His feet made no sound at all. It should have been comforting. It was not. We argued, Godric said, voice rough. We fought over it. I threatened to tear the castle down stone by stone to find what Salazar hid. He laughed at me. Said I could swing a sword at walls all year and find nothing but sore arms. Naya. Albus watched the agitation, the old rage resurfacing as if it had never been laid to rest. Rowena said the magic was not like ours, Godric went on. Helga said we should stop fighting in front of the children. Salazar said the children were the point. He spat the last word like a curse. And then he left. You did not stop him, Albus said, not accusing, simply stating. Godric's shoulders sagged a fraction. We tried. The admission hung between them. The dead were not allowed to change what they had done. They could only name it. Albus's bandaged hand pulsed, a reminder that naming was sometimes the beginning of punishment. I am not asking you to fix it, Albus said quietly. I am asking you to help me understand the shape of the castle's oldest magic. Hogwarts has protections that... Godric's gaze snapped back. You want to use the castle as a weapon. I want to use it as a shield, Albus said. Godric studied him for a long moment. Shields can be used to hit as well. Albus's mouth curved faintly. Yes, and sometimes they must. Godric's eyes flicked down to the ring. That thing, this stone, it brings us like fish hooked from deep water. It does not feel like honor. It is not, Albus admitted, and I will not pretend otherwise. Godric's expression softened, grudgingly. At least you have the courage to call it ugly. Albus's mind tightened around another question, one he had delayed because he feared the answer. When you built Hogwarts, he said, did you imagine it would one day be used as a fortress against our own? Godric's mouth twisted. We built it as a fortress against everyone. Albus frowned slightly. Godric's gaze was fierce. The world was not kind to us. Wizards were hunted, burned, drowned. We were told we were demons because we could heal and light fire with a whisper. We needed a place where children could learn without fear. And yes, without hiding. He leaned closer, the cold mist around him tightening. But do not mistake me. We did not build this castle to hide forever. We built it to raise children who could walk out into the world and change it. Nay, Kisim. Albus's throat tightened. And did they? Godric's smile was sharp. Some did. Some became tyrants. Some became saints. Most became tired. Albus exhaled slowly, the air tasting of candle smoke and rain. You have been tired a long time, Godric said abruptly, and there was no cruelty in it, only a blunt truth that made Albus flinch. Albus gave a small, humorless laugh. Yes. Godric's gaze dropped again to Albus' hand. And you are dying. The words did not surprise Albus. The dead saw differently. Or perhaps the stones simply let them see what Albus already knew. I am, Albus said. Godric nodded once, as if accepting a battlefield report. Then your questions should be the right ones. Albus's fingers tightened around the ring. That is precisely my fear. Godric's eyes narrowed. Then ask the one who would know more than I. Albus's heart gave a slow beat. Rowena, he said. Godric's expression was almost fond, despite everything. Rowena. She was the cleverest of us. Sometimes too clever. She saw doors where the rest of us saw walls. Albus swallowed. The stone's coldness pressed insistently against his palm, eager. He turned the ring again. Rowena arrived like a thought taking form. One moment the air beside the bookcases was empty. The next it held the outline of a woman who seemed carved from winter light. She stood straight-backed, her hair dark and braided, her robes a deeper blue than any modern dye could manage, threaded through with silver stitching that caught the candlelight and made it look like she wore constellations. Her eyes were the first thing Albus noticed, gray, sharp, and utterly unimpressed. She looked at Godric, then at Albus, then at the ring in Albus' hand, and her expression tightened with instant understanding. You, Rowena said, and her voice was cool as a blade laid on skin. You have no right. Godric made a rough sound. Rowena. Do not, Rowena snapped, and Godric fell silent, startled. Rowena's gaze did not leave Albus. This is a hallow. Albus inclined his head. Yes. Rowena stepped closer. The cold in the room deepened, but her presence brought something else too. a pressure behind the eyes, as if the air had become thick with unsaid questions. "You know what it does," Rowena said. "I know what it tempts," Albus replied. Rowena's mouth tightened. Temptation is the mind's word for hunger. It does not make it less dangerous. Albus held her gaze. "Agreed." Rowena's eyes flicked to his bandaged hand. "And you have already paid for your curiosity." Albus did not deny it. Rowena turned slowly, taking in the office with a scholar's eye. The instruments, the stacks of parchment, the strange modern details layered over ancient stone. Her gaze lingered on the sorting hat, and for a moment something like sadness passed over her face. "They kept it," she murmured. Godric's expression softened. "Of course they did." Rowena's gaze snapped back to Albus. "Why have you called us?" Albus chose his words with care. Rowena's mind was a blade that would cut any muddled thought in half. "Hogwarts is divided," Albus said. "Not only by houses, but by fear. There is prejudice again. Blood purity, as Godric has named it. There is war. I want to understand what you intended for the school, and how its oldest magic might protect the children who live here now." Rowena's eyes narrowed slightly. "Old magic does not protect children. People protect children." Albus felt the truth of its sting. "And yet," Rowena continued, "a castle can make it easier for people to do what is right." Godric gave a short laugh. "That sounds like you." Rowena ignored him. "Tell me something, Headmaster. Do you believe the school is a place of learning or a place of sorting?" Albus's mouth went dry. The question struck closer than he liked. "A place of learning," he said carefully. Rowena's gaze was merciless. "Then why do you let it define children by a single trait before they know themselves? Why do you encourage them to wear identity like armor, to fight one another for points like starving dogs?" Godric bristled. "Points are a game. A game becomes a habit," Rowena cut in. "And habits become culture." Albus felt a slow, steady shame spread through him. He had defended the house system for years as tradition, as structure, as harmless. But he had also watched it harden into something uglier. Something that made children view one another as rivals by default. It was not meant to be this rigid," Albus said quietly. Rowena's eyes flashed. "No, it was meant to be fluid. To guide, not cage." Godric folded his arms. "We did not predict everything." Rowena's gaze sharpened. "We did not try hard enough." The words fell like stones. Albus found himself leaning forward slightly. "Rowena," he said, and the use of her first name felt strange on his tongue, intimate in a way he had not earned. "Tell me about the magic in the foundations, about how you bound the castle to itself, about what it can do." Rowena studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, her expression shifted. Not softer, but more complex, as if she had decided he was worth the effort of explanation. "Hogwarts was built on a confluence," Rowena said. "Not merely of ley lines, as some fools will insist, but of older currents. The land was already humming. We listened." Albus's breath caught. "Listened." Rowena nodded. "The castle is not just stone. It is agreements, promises. Wards are not walls. They are choices repeated until the world remembers them." Albus felt the words settle into him like seeds. "And Salazar?" Albus asked, unable to stop himself. "What did he do to hide the chamber?" Rowena's gaze went distant, as if looking down a long corridor of memory. "He used fear," Rowena said softly. "He used the fact that we did not want to break the castle open while children slept upstairs. He used our mercy as a tool." Godric's jaw tightened. "And we let him." Rowena's eyes snapped back. "We did. And so the castle learned that secrets can live beneath it." Albus's fingers tightened around the ring. The stone seemed to thrum, as if pleased. "Then, perhaps," Albus said, voice low, The castle can learn the opposite as well. Rowena's gaze held his. Only if you teach it. Rowena lifted a hand, palm outward, and the air above the desk rippled. For a moment, Albus thought she meant to cast a spell, but the motion was too calm for wand work, too simple. The mist around her thickened, and from it unfurled a sheet of parchment as if drawn from memory itself. It settled onto the desk without sound. Albus stared. The parchment was old, not merely in appearance, but in aura. It carried the faint, dry smell of time, of ink that had sunk deep into fibers and refused to fade. Across it spread a diagram of the castle in lines and symbols that made Albus' mind itch, the way it did when confronted with a language he could almost understand. "This," Rowena said, "is not a map, it is a pattern." Godric leaned in, eyes narrowing. "That is your handwriting." Rowena's gaze flicked to him. "Yes." Godric's mouth twisted. "I can never read it." Rowena ignored him again, focusing on Albus. "You asked about the foundations. You asked what the castle can do. Listen, then." Albus bent over the parchment. The runes were not runes he knew, though some resembled old variants of familiar symbols. They seemed to shift when he looked away, as if refusing to be pinned down by a modern gaze. "Hogwarts," Rowena said, tapping a point near what would have been the heart of the castle, "was anchored by 4 vows. 4 intentions. Each of us poured something into it, not just magic, but our own convictions." Godric snorted softly. "Convictions. That's a polite word for stubbornness." Rowena's lips tightened. Stubbornness is simply conviction without grace. Albus almost smiled despite everything. Rowena's finger moved. Courage, wisdom, loyalty, ambition. Each vow became a current. The castle responds to those currents. It will open doors for a child who is brave enough to step into darkness. It will reveal answers to a mind that does not stop at the first question. It will shelter those who choose others over themselves. It will grant opportunity to those who grasp for it. Albus's gaze lifted. "Then it is biased," he said, and felt the dangerous edge of the thought. Rowena's expression was flat. "Everything is biased. A wall that stops an enemy also stops a friend. A door that opens for one remains shut for another. The question is whether the bias is deliberate and whether it serves the world you want." "Nay." Albus's throat tightened. "And Salazar's vow?" Rowena's eyes sharpened. "Ambition," she said. But there was a subtle emphasis, as if she meant something more specific. "He poured into the castle the belief that power should protect itself." Godric's hand clenched. "And he used that belief to hide a weapon." Rowena's gaze did not leave Albus. "Yes." Albus looked down again. The parchment seemed to pulse faintly under candlelight. "If the castle responds to those currents," Albus said, "then could someone twist them?" Rowena's eyes narrowed. "You have already seen someone do it." Albus's mind flashed to the chamber opening, to whispers in corridors, to children turning on children with suspicion, to the way fear had made the school feel smaller. "Yes," Albus admitted. Rowena leaned closer. The cold around her deepened. "Then you must change the currents. Not by destroying the houses, perhaps. That would be like tearing off a limb and expecting the body to run. But by teaching new habits. By making the castle witness different choices until it remembers a different pattern." "None." Godric's gaze flicked from the parchment to Albus. "That sounds slow." "It is," Rowena agreed. "Most worthwhile things are." Albus's bandaged hand hovered above the parchment. He wanted to touch, but something in him feared that if he touched it, it would become too real. Another burden added to the pile. "Tell me," Albus said softly, "is there anything in the castle Salazar left that even you did not find?" Rowena's expression tightened. "Yes." Godric's head snapped up. "Rowena." She held his gaze, unflinching. There were places he sealed with his own language, his own blood. I could see the seams but could not pry them open without damage. Godric's anger was instant. We should have... We did not, Rowena said sharply. And the dead do not get to rewrite the past. The words struck Albus like a bell. The dead do not get to rewrite the past. He thought of Ariana. He forced the thought away, clinging to Rowena's logic like a rope. Then how? Albus asked, voice steady by sheer will. Do I find what he hid? Rowena's eyes were very clear. You do not, she said. Not directly. You build around it. You strengthen what you can. You do not let his secret define your school. Godric's mouth tightened. And if the secret kills children? Rowena's gaze flicked to him, and something like grief passed through it. Then you face it with living hands, not dead counsel. Albus's fingers tightened around the ring. The stone's coldness pressed, insistent, greedy. He had one more voice to hear, one more perspective that might remind him why he was doing this at all. He turned the ring again. Cold in the office softened as Helga arrived, not vanishing but changing shape. The mist that formed her was warmer, honeyed, as if the stone itself had momentarily remembered what comfort felt like. She appeared near the fireplace, hands clasped loosely before her, her robe simple compared to Rowena's, more practical than beautiful, stitched with small patterns that looked like wheat and running water. Her hair was pulled back, and there were lines at the corners of her eyes that suggested she had smiled a great deal in life and had learned what smiling cost. Her gaze went first to Godric, then to Rowena, and her face softened with something like relief. Then she looked at Albus. The softness did not vanish. It tightened into something fiercer. Oh, Helga said quietly. Albus swallowed. The word, spoken with that particular combination of pity and disappointment, made him feel suddenly very young. You've brought trouble with you, Helga said, voice gentle but not forgiving. And you've wrapped it up in noble intentions, like a child hiding a broken dish under a cloth. Godric's mouth quirked, as if he approved. Rowena's eyes narrowed. Helga. Let him hear it, Helga said, and Rowena fell silent, lips thinning. Albus forced himself to meet Helga's gaze. You are correct, he said softly. I have brought trouble. Helga stepped closer. The warmth around her did not chase away the stone's coldness. It simply stood beside it, a reminder that comfort and danger could share the same room. Why? Helga asked. Have you called us? Albus repeated what he had said to the others, though he found his voice roughening when he spoke of children and fear. Helga listened without interrupting, her expression composed, but her eyes sharpened at certain words: prejudice, purity, war. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she shook her head slowly. We built this place so children could stop being frightened, Helga said. Not so they could become frightened in fancier ways. Albus's throat tightened. I know. Helga's gaze flicked to his bandaged hand. No, she said softly. You know pain. That is not the same thing. Albus flinched, just slightly. Helga sighed. The sound was weary, and in it Albus heard centuries of watching people repeat the same mistakes and calling it fate. Tell me, Helga said, how do you treat the children who are not exceptional? Albus blinked. How do you treat the ones who do not shine in duels, Helga pressed, who do not grasp complex spells in an afternoon, who do not have famous names or tragic destinies or clever tongues, the ones who are simply... Albus's mouth went dry. Godric shifted uncomfortably. Rowena's gaze flicked away for the first time, as if the question struck somewhere tender. I try to protect them, Albus said, and heard how inadequate it sounded. Helga's eyes held his. Protection is not enough. You must teach them they matter. Albus inhaled slowly. We do, he said. We try. But the world... The world, Helga interrupted gently, will always be unkind. That is why Hogwarts must be kinder. Her gaze moved to the banners above. You let these houses become kingdoms, she said. You let children learn loyalty to a color before loyalty to one another. Godric bristled. Belonging is not a sin. No, Helga agreed. But belonging becomes a sin when it requires exclusion. Rowena's jaw tightened. We did not intend. Helga lifted a hand. Intentions are seeds, she said. But what grows depends on the soil, and the soil has been poisoned. Albus felt the words settle in him like stones. Poisoned. Yes. He had watched it happen in slow motion for years, convincing himself it was manageable, that tradition could be guided with a gentle hand. But poison did not respond to gentleness. It spread. I have tried, Albus said quietly. The admission tasted like failure. I have tried to keep the school safe, to keep it whole, to keep it from becoming a battlefield. Helga's gaze softened, not with forgiveness, but with understanding. And in doing so, she said, you have become so busy holding the walls up that you forget the children inside them are still growing. Albus closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the office seemed sharper, the candlelight harsher. Tell me, Albus said, voice low. If you could change one thing, what would you change? Helga's answer came without hesitation. I would make them eat together, she said. Godric blinked. They do eat together. Helga shook her head. They sit at the same table, but they do not eat together. They sit with their own and call it unity. I would make them share bread with strangers until strangers became familiar. Rowena's gaze softened faintly, reluctant approval flickering. Albus's mind raced. It was simple. It was infuriatingly simple. And in its simplicity, it carried the weight of truth. Most divisions did not begin with ideology. They began with habit. Helga's gaze returned to Albus. And you, she said gently, must stop asking the dead how to save the living. The stone's coldness pressed harder, as if offended. Albus's fingers tightened around the ring. There is one more, he said, and the words fell out before he could stop them. Godric's expression darkened. Rowena's face went still. Helga's eyes saddened. No, Helga said softly. Albus looked down at the stone. I must try. He turned the ring again. At first, nothing happened. The cold thickened, pressing down like deep water. The candles guttered, their flames shrinking as if starved. A faint rime formed along the edge of the window glass, blooming outward in delicate fern patterns that had no place in summer. Albus held his breath, mind locked on a name he did not want to speak aloud. Salazar. He felt the syllables in his thoughts like a key, turning in a lock that refused to open. The ring stone warmed. No, not warmed. It pulsed, a heartbeat too slow, too heavy. The air in front of the desk darkened, as it had for Godric, for Rowena, for Helga. But the darkness did not shape itself into a person. It remained darkness. A pressure built in Albus's skull, as if something on the other side of a door was leaning its weight against it, refusing to let it open. The cold deepened until it stung. Godric's hand went to his sword hilt. He's resisting. Rowena's eyes narrowed. Or he's anchored. Helga's voice was quiet. Or he's gone in a way the rest of us are not. Albus's bandaged hand throbbed. He felt Severus' containment spell tighten, as if responding to the stone's pull, straining to keep the curse from tasting this magic and growing hungry. He turned the ring again, deliberate, controlled, and the pressure spiked. The office seemed to tilt. A sound whispered through the air, soft, sibilant, like breath through teeth. It was not English. Albus's stomach dropped. The whisper slithered along the edges of his hearing, incomprehensible but intimate, as if it knew the shape of his thoughts. Rowena stiffened. That is his tongue, Godric growled. Helga's face went pale. Stop! Albus's heart hammered. The whisper grew louder, and with it came a sensation like fingers brushing the inside of his mind, cold and curious. He was not summoning. He was being tested. Albus's grip on the ring tightened until his knuckles ached. "Who are you?" he demanded, not aloud, but in the firm, focused way one speaks in the mind when casting silent spells. The whisper paused. Then it answered, not with words, but with a feeling. Amusement, sharp as a knife's edge. Godric took a step forward. "Albus." Rowena's gaze was fixed on the darkness. "He is not coming." Helga's eyes were on Albus. "And something else is." The cold in the office surged, and the candles went out one by one, not with smoke, but with sudden absence, as if their flames had been snuffed by a hand that did not exist. In the dark, the ring's stone shone faintly, not with light, but with a sheen like oil on water. Albus felt the temptation rise, quick and brutal, not towards Salazar, but towards something nearer and more devastating. "Ariana." His counter-charm trembled, a thin thread pulled tight. For a moment, he felt it hold. Then the whisper brushed his mind again, and the thread snapped. Albus's breath hitched. The darkness in front of him shifted. A figure formed, small at first, then clearer. A girl. Albus's throat closed. He had not called her, and yet she stood there, pale as moonlight, hair loose, eyes wide with the same old hurt that had haunted his sleep for decades. The office, the founders, the war, everything narrowed into the simple, unbearable fact of her presence. "Ariana," Albus whispered aloud, and his voice broke like glass. Helga made a sound like a sob. Rowena's face tightened, not with cruelty but with recognition of danger. Godric swore under his breath. Ariana took a step forward. Her feet made no sound. Her gaze fixed on Albus's bandaged hand, and her expression shifted, confusion knitting her brows. "You're hurt," she said. Albus's vision blurred. He could not breathe properly. His hand throbbed. The ring burned cold against his skin. "I am," he managed, voice ragged. Ariana lifted a hand as if to touch his cheek, and Albus leaned forward before he could stop himself. The stone's coldness surged, hungry. Helga's voice cut through, sharp for the first time. "Albus, stop." Albus's eyes flicked to her, and in that instant of attention, the spell of longing loosened. He saw Ariana more clearly, saw the faintness, the wrongness, the way her edges seemed to waver like mist, the way her eyes held not only her own sadness but Albus' memory of it. Not her. Not truly. Ariana smiled, small and pleading. "Come with me," she whispered. Albus' heart cracked. He closed his eyes. He tightened his grip on the ring until pain cut through longing like a knife. "No," he said, voice shaking. "Not like this." He drew his wand with his left hand and snapped it downward, breaking the chalk circle he had woven into the floor. The ward lines shattered. The office rushed back into itself like a lung collapsing. The candles flared back to life, spitting and guttering. The silver instruments jolted into motion with frantic clicking, as if trying to make up for lost time. Ariana's figure wavered, her expression twisting with sudden anger, not hers but something behind her. The sibilant whisper hissed, sharp with irritation. Then the mist tore apart, and she was gone. Albus stood trembling, the ring heavy in his palm, his breath ragged. The founders stared at him, Godric with grim understanding, Rowena with cold disappointment, Helga with a sorrow that made Albus want to crawl out of his own skin. Helga spoke softly, her voice like a hand on a bruise. "That is why we said no." For a long time, none of them spoke. Albus' heart slowed in reluctant increments. The ache in his right hand pulsed like a metronome, reminding him that time was still moving, that pain did not pause for sentiment. He set the ring down on the desk with a care that felt absurd. It lay there like an accusation. He stared at his own hands, one bandaged and half dead, one shaking with the aftershock of grief. He had dragged the founders into his office, had attempted to drag Salazar, and instead had almost dragged himself into the grave behind Ariana. Godric broke the silence first, voice rough. "He did that," he said. Rowena's eyes narrowed. "We do not know." Godric's gaze was fierce. "We know enough." Helga's face was pale. "The stone does not simply obey," she murmured. "It has its own hunger." Albus swallowed. His mouth tasted of ash. "It showed me what I wanted," he said, voice hoarse. "It showed you what would break you," Rowena corrected, crisp as ever. "Do not romanticize it." Albus flinched, but he did not argue. Rowena was right. The stone did not care about love. It cared about leverage. Godric stepped closer, his expression hard. "You said you wanted Salazar because he left something that still hurts children." "Yes," Albus said. Godric's jaw tightened. "Then you must face his legacy without his voice." Rowena's gaze was cold. "And without this." Her eyes flicked to the ring. Helga looked at Albus, and her expression softened again. Not forgiving but understanding in the way one understands a child who has touched fire after being warned. "You are not the first to think the dead could solve the living's problems," Helga said gently. "And you will not be the last." Albus's throat tightened. "I wanted—" He stopped, because any explanation sounded like excuse. Helga nodded as if she understood anyway. "You wanted certainty," she said. "You wanted someone older than you to tell you that the path you're walking is right." Albus closed his eyes. The words struck too true. Rowena's gaze sharpened. "And you wanted absolution?" Albus's eyes snapped open. "No," he said, and the denial was instinctive, almost angry. "I do not." Rowena's expression did not change. "You do," she said simply. "Every clever man does. You want the past to approve of you, because then you do not have to sit with your own doubt." "Nah, be." Albus' jaw clenched. The ache in his hand flared. Doubt was a familiar companion. It slept at the foot of his bed and woke with him. Godric's gaze softened slightly, as if he had decided Albus' honesty was worth something. "We cannot give you certainty," he said. "We can only tell you what we learned too late." Helga nodded. "And we learned," she said quietly, "that love is not enough if it is not practical." Albus stared at her. "Practical?" Helga's smile was small. Bread shared. Hands held. Rules made fair. Teachers who look at a child and see a person, not a problem. "No. Rowena's voice was cool. "And minds challenged. Questions encouraged. Curiosity rewarded, not punished." Godric's voice was firm. "And courage taught properly. Not just charging into danger, but standing up when everyone else sits down. Saying no when it is easier to say yes." Albus listened, and something in him steadied. Not because their words fixed anything, but because they reminded him of something he had known and forgotten in the weight of war. Hogwarts was not a strategy. It was a promise. He reached for the ring again, then stopped. Helga's eyes sharpened. "Don't. Dot." Albus withdrew his hand, feeling ridiculous. "I won't," he said. "Not here. Not like that." Rowena's gaze flicked to the window where rain still slid down the glass in silver threads. "You will try again," she said, not as a question but as a diagnosis. Albus did not deny it. Godric's expression darkened. "Then do it where he built his secrets," he said. "Not in your comfortable office with your toys and portraits." Albus's gaze lifted. "You mean the dungeons?" Godric nodded once. "Stone remembers stone." Rowena's eyes narrowed. "If he anchored himself, you may need to stand closer to the anchor. But be warned. Anchors can drag you down." Helga's gaze held Albus. "And if you go looking for him," she said softly, "do not take your loneliness with you. Loneliness is what the stone feeds on." Albus's throat tightened. He thought of Severus's anger, of the silent fear in his eyes. He thought of Minerva's steady presence, of the way she would look at him if she knew. He had been lonely for so long, he had begun to think it was simply part of leadership, like the robes or the office. "I will be careful," Albus said, and heard how thin the promise sounded. Helga stepped back slightly. The warmth around her flickered. "We are fading," she said, and there was no fear in her voice, only acceptance. Godric's gaze lingered on the banners, the castle. "Tell them," he said abruptly. Albus frowned. "Tell who?" "Tell the children," Godric said. "Tell them this place belongs to them, not to their house, not to their blood, not to their parents' grudges. Tell them the castle was built by people who made mistakes." Rowena's eyes sharpened. "And that they are allowed to outgrow us." Helga smiled faintly. "And that they should." The air in the office shifted. The mist that held them began to thin, their outlines wavering. Albus's fingers curled around the ring, but he did not turn it. "Thank you," he whispered. Godric's smile was fierce and brief. "Don't waste it." Rowena's expression was unreadable. "And stop using that stone like a crutch." Helga's gaze was kind. "Sleep," she said softly, and then her warmth was gone. The office was suddenly just an office again. Candles, rain, ticking instruments, portraits that breathed and pretended not to listen. Albus sat very still. Then he stood, and he went down into the castle. Hogwarts at night had a different voice. By day, it was full of footsteps and chatter, the bright noise of children pretending not to be afraid of the future. By night it spoke in the quiet language of settling stone, distant water, the occasional creak of an old beam that refused to admit it was old. Albus moved through it like a man who belonged and did not. He knew every corridor, every shortcut, every portrait that might tattle if you gave it something worth tattling about. And yet tonight, the castle felt unfamiliar, not because it had changed, but because Albus had. The ring was in his pocket again, wrapped tight. The bandages on his hand were clean, but he could feel the curse beneath them like a living thing pacing. Fawkes drifted ahead, a soft red presence in the gloom. The phoenix feathers caught torchlight and threw it back in small, warm flashes that made the shadows seem less absolute. Albus descended stairs, turned corners, past sleeping classrooms. He did not go toward the Slytherin entrance. He had no desire to test wards meant for students and their passwords. Instead, he took a route few used, a narrow spiral staircase hidden behind a tapestry of a troll in a tutu, a passage that dipped into older stone, older air. The scent changed as he went down. Less candle wax, more earth. The walls sweated cold. Here the castle felt less like a school, and more like what it had originally been. A fortress and a sanctuary both, built with hands that had known fear. At the bottom of the staircase was a corridor that ended in a blank wall. Albus held his wand up, and the light it produced was small and stubborn. He reached out with his left hand and touched the stone. It was cool, damp. He could feel, faintly, the hum of magic in it, like the vibration of a string pulled taut. He had been taught, long ago, that Hogwarts responded to intent, not wishes, not demands. Intent, the quiet certainty of someone who knew what they were doing. Albus did not always know what he was doing, but he knew what he was trying to protect. "I need to pass," he murmured, not as a spell but as a request to the castle itself. The stone did not move. Albus exhaled slowly. He let his mind settle, let it reach not for Ariana or for the Founder's words, but for the simple truth of why he was here. Children die. The school. The promise. He placed his palm flat against the wall, ignoring the sting as the curse responded to the magic in the stone. "Hogwarts," he whispered, and felt ridiculous, like a man praying to brick. "Open." The stone shivered. A seam appeared, fine as a thread. Then, with the slow reluctance of something old being asked to bend, the wall shifted. A narrow doorway opened into darkness. Fawkes let out a quiet croon, approval or warning. The phoenix drifted through first. Albus followed. The passage beyond was rough-hewn, not finished like the corridors above. The stone here was older, the marks of tools still visible. It smelled of wet rock and ancient dust. He walked for what felt like a long time, though the distance could not have been far. Hogwarts folded space in ways that made distance a matter of mood. The air grew colder. Somewhere, water dripped steadily, patient as time. At last the passage widened into a chamber. Albus stopped at the threshold, his breath catching. The room was not large, but it felt significant in the way graves feel significant. Not because of size, but because of what had been placed there with intent. The ceiling was low, the stone arched. The walls were carved with shallow designs that might once have been intricate, though time had softened them. 4 symbols marked the corners: a lion, an eagle, a badger, a serpent. At the center of the floor was a circle of darker stone, polished by countless feet, or perhaps by none at all. It looked like a place made for standing and speaking. Albus stepped into the circle. The air pressed against him as if recognizing him, as if weighing whether he belonged. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring. The stone in the serpent corner seemed to darken, as if leaning toward it. Albus's pulse quickened. This was not his office. This was older. Here, the castle's foundations listened more closely. He did not yet turn the ring. Instead, he looked around and whispered, very softly, "Salazar." The air answered with a faint hiss, like breath drawn through teeth. Albus's grip tightened. He raised the ring, and he turned it. The cold hit harder here, sharper, as if the chamber had fewer manners than the office. The mist that rose from the ring pooled around Albus's boots, coiling like smoke. The carved symbols on the walls seemed to deepen, shadows filling their grooves. Albus focused his mind like a blade. Salazar.t. Salazar. Salazar. The hiss returned, louder now, running along the stone as if the walls themselves were speaking in a language too old for human mouths. The sound made Albus' teeth ache. The darkness in front of him thickened. Again, it did not form a man. Instead, the serpent symbol on the wall seemed to move, not physically, but in the way a shadow seems to writhe when candlelight shifts. The carved eyes caught the torchlight and held it, making them gleam faintly, wetly. Albus's stomach tightened. He could feel something leaning on the edge of the summoning, testing the tether, deciding whether to be pulled or to pull back. He turned the ring again. The hiss sharpened. The mist surged upward. For a moment, the chamber smelled faintly of damp earth and something metallic, like blood spilled on stone. A shape formed, not in front of Albus, but behind him. Fawkes gave a low, warning croon. Albus did not turn immediately. He held still, every muscle tight, and forced himself to breathe. Panic would feed the thing in the mist. He turned slowly. A figure stood near the serpent carving, half-formed, its edges wavering. Tall, robed, the face indistinct, as if refusing to be remembered. Albus's heart hammered. "Salazar," he said, voice steady by sheer will. The figure did not answer with words. It hissed. The sound was not merely sound. It slid into Albus's mind, pressing against the language centers like oil. For a dizzy moment he could almost understand, not the words, but the intent. Suspicion, irritation, amusement. Albus tightened his grip on the ring. "I did not come to bargain," he said. "I came to ask." The figure shifted, and for an instant, the face sharpened into focus. Pale skin, dark eyes that gleamed like wet stone, a mouth that curled in something not quite a smile. Then it blurred again, as if refusing to be pinned down. Rowena had called anchors dangerous. Now Albus understood why. This shade did not feel like Godric or Helga or Rowena. Those had felt like echoes pulled forward. This felt like something still gripping the world with claws. "Who are you?" Albus demanded, not certain anymore that he was speaking to the man himself. The figure's head tilted slightly, as if listening. Then it spoke, and the voice was English, accented strangely, as if each word had been learned by force rather than habit. "You stand on my stone," the figure said. Albus's breath caught. The voice was low, cold, amused. "You do not answer to my call," Albus said. The figure's smile sharpened. "No." Fawkes' feathers lifted slightly, the phoenix's body a tense blaze of red. Albus steadied his breathing. "Then why are you here?" The figure's eyes gleamed. "Because you are stubborn," it said. "Because you carry my work in your pocket and pretend you do not." Albus's fingers tightened around the ring. The stone's coldness pressed against his skin like a hungry mouth. "You can resist the stone," Albus said. "But you cannot stop it entirely. It has pulled you close." The figure laughed softly. The sound was like a knife sliding out of a sheath. "It pulled at me," it said. "I let it." Albus's stomach dropped. "Why?" The figure's gaze fixed on Albus's bandaged hand. "Because you bleed," it said. "Because you are dying. Because you are frightened." Albus's jaw clenched. "I am not frightened." The figure's smile widened. "Of course you are," it said. "All clever men are frightened. They dress fear up as strategy." Albus felt anger flare sharp and bright. It steadied him. He preferred anger to longing. Anger was easier to control. "You left a chamber," Albus said. "You left a monster. Children have suffered because of it. Tell me why." "Nah. I'm bay." The figure's expression did not change. "To protect," it said. Albus stared. "Protect whom?" The figure's eyes gleamed. "Us." The answer was simple, and in its simplicity, it was horrifying. Albus's voice was quiet. "Children were killed." The figure shrugged, a slow movement. "Children die," it said. "They died outside these walls. I wanted them to live inside." "Not all of them," Albus said, and felt his own voice harden. The figure's gaze sharpened. "Blood matters," it said. "You know this. You have seen it." "Nah." Albus's mind flashed, unbidden, to the war. To families wiped out, to ideology sharpened into slaughter. Blood mattered because people made it matter. "No," Albus said firmly. "People make it matter." The figure's smile was thin. "And people," it said, "are predictable." Albus's bandaged hand throbbed. The curse seemed to listen. He took a step forward and the mist around the figure stirred. "Tell me," Albus said, voice low. "Did you regret it?" For the first time, the figure's expression wavered. Not softening, not changing into something human, but flickering, as if a different face wanted to emerge and was being held down. The answer, when it came, was not a word. It was a silence. Silence was, Albus discovered, the most honest answer he had been given tonight. It hung in the chamber like a blade suspended over skin. The figure's outline wavered, mist thinning and thickening in slow pulses, as if whatever held it here was breathing. Albus held very still. He could feel his heartbeat in his teeth. He could feel the curse in his hand respond to the presence of old magic, restless, eager. Severus's containment was a tight band around it, but bands could snap. "Speak," Albus said softly. The figure's eyes gleamed. The mouth curved, not quite a smile. "You want regret," it said. "You want me to say I was wrong, so you can build your righteousness on my bones." Albus's jaw tightened. "I want truth." The figure laughed again, quiet and sharp. "Truth," it said. "You are headmaster. Truth is what you hide from children so they can sleep." Albus flinched. The words hit because they were close enough to be true to hurt. He had hidden. He had lied. He had done it with a gentle smile and called it protection. "Do not pretend you know me," Albus said, voice cold. The figure's eyes held his. "I know your kind. it said. You are the ones who think you can guide history with careful hands. You are the ones who believe you can tame wolves by teaching them manners. Albus's grip on the ring tightened until his knuckles whitened. And what are you? He demanded. The figure's smile widened, showing nothing but shadow. I am the one who stopped pretending, it said. Fawkes let out a low croon, warning thick in it. Albus forced himself to keep his gaze on the figure's face. If he looked away, the stone would have room to slide other images into his mind. Ariana's pleading eyes, the temptation to collapse into grief. You anchored yourself, Albus said, and felt the truth in his bones. That is why you resisted. You did something to your essence. You bound yourself to Hogwarts. The figure's head tilted. Clever, it said, approval as cutting as insult. Yes, I did not trust death. Death is uncertain. I preferred stone. Stone remembers. Rowena's words echoed. Anchors can drag you down. Albus's stomach tightened. That is not what the stone does, he said. It pulls echoes, not souls. The figure's eyes gleamed. Echoes, it said. Names. Shadows. Call it what you like. I made myself loud enough to be heard. Gah! Albus felt cold spread along his spine. Why? The figure's gaze flicked to the 4 symbols carved in the walls. Because Hogwarts is mine, it said simply. No, Albus said, and the word came out harder than he intended. It belongs to the children. The figure's smile was thin. Children are guests, it said. The castle remains. Albus's bandaged hand throbbed. The curse seemed to agree with the idea of permanence, hungry for it. He took another step forward. The mist around the figure stirred, brushing Albus's face like cold fingers. If you anchored yourself, Albus said, then you did not move on. The figure's gaze sharpened. Moving on, it said, voice contemptuous. To what? To nothing? To judgment? To whatever story your priests tell you to keep you obedient? Albus felt a flash of anger. Bright, familiar. He had met this kind of contempt before, wrapped in brilliance. You feared death, Albus said softly. The figure's eyes narrowed. I feared stupidity, it hissed, and for a moment the English slipped, the sibilance returning. I feared handing my work to chance. And so you left a monster, Albus said. The figure's mouth curved. I left a safeguard, it corrected. Albus's jaw clenched. A basilisk is not a safeguard. The figure's gaze was cold. It is, it said, if you intend to be the one holding the leash. Albus's breath hitched. The idea landed with a sickening weight. Salazar had not built the chamber to protect the school from outsiders. He had built it to give himself, his bloodline, his ideology, an ultimate power within it. You never meant to share Hogwarts, Albus said. The figure's smile widened, slow. Did you? It asked. Albus froze. The question was a trap, but it was also a mirror. Albus had shared power in careful ways, had guarded certain knowledge, had decided what others could handle. He had told himself it was for their good. The figure watched him, amused. Tell me, Albus said, voice steady by force. Do you still influence the castle? The figure's gaze gleamed. Sometimes, it said. When someone whispers in my tongue. When someone believes what I believed. When fear makes them hungry for a simple enemy. Albus's stomach dropped. The castle could be nudged. The currents Rowena had named could be twisted. And the chamber, Albus said. Why did it answer to a child years ago? Why did it open? The figure's smile sharpened. Because the castle remembers blood, it said. Because blood speaks. Albus thought of the boy, Harry, speaking a language he had never been taught, a legacy shoved into his mouth by accident and violence. He felt rage rise again, not at Harry, but at the chain of choices that had led to a child carrying a dark wizard's power. You are proud, Albus said quietly. The figure's eyes glittered. "I am certain," it said. "Pride is what lesser men call certainty when they cannot bear it." Albus's bandaged hand pulsed. Severus's spell strained. He could feel sweat prick under his collar despite the cold. He realized suddenly that the stone was not merely summoning. It was feeding. Each exchange, each emotion, made the tether stronger. The figure leaned in slightly, voice lowering. "You are dying," it murmured. "Would you like to not die?" Albus's blood went cold. This, he realized, was the true trap. Not ideology. Not argument. Fear. The stone hummed in his palm. Ariana's face hovered at the edge of his mind, not yet formed, waiting. Albus clenched his jaw. "No," he said, and it was the hardest no of his life. The figure's smile widened. "Liar," it whispered. Albus lifted his wand. "Enough." The figure's eyes narrowed, amused. "You cannot banish me," it said. "You stood on my stone. You called my name. You invited me." Albus's voice was calm, cold. "Then I will uninvite you." He snapped his wand downward, striking the stone circle beneath his feet with the tip. The magic line he had stepped into shuddered. The runes faintly flickered. The figure's expression sharpened, irritation flashing through. "Careful," it hissed. "Stone remembers." "And so do I," Albus said. He broke the circle. The chamber jolted as if struck. The torch flames bent sideways, flaring and shrinking, and dust rained from the ceiling in slow, glittering threads. The mist that had held the figure together tore like cloth ripped by claws. For an instant, Albus saw the face clearly. Eyes like wet stone, mouth curled with contempt. Then the figure fractured, dissolving into a whip of pale vapor that lashed across the floor and slammed against the serpent carving as if trying to force itself back into the stone. The hiss rose, furious now, filling the chamber, slipping into Albus' skull like cold water poured into his ears. Fawkes screamed. The phoenix cry was not merely sound. It was magic made audible, pure, and piercing. It cut through the hiss like sunlight through fog. The chamber seemed to recoil, the shadows thinning for a heartbeat. Albus staggered, not from physical force but from the sudden pressure released as the tether snapped. His bandaged hand flared with pain as the curse strained violently, hungry for the power that had been in the air. He pressed his right hand against his chest, as if he could physically hold the curse in place. He could feel Severus's containment spell tighten, grinding like gears under strain. The hiss faltered, then sharpened into something like laughter. Not quite laughter. Mockery. "You cannot erase me," the voice whispered, now disembodied. "You cannot undo what is built." Albus forced himself to breathe. His lungs wanted to seize, to panic. He refused. "I do not need to erase you," he said aloud, voice rough. "I need to outgrow you." The chamber went very still. For a moment, Albus thought the voice might answer again. He felt it hover, tasting his words. Then it withdrew, slipping back into the stone like a serpent vanishing into a crack. The mist thinned. The torch flames steadied, though they burned lower now. The carved serpent on the wall looked like nothing more than stone again. Cold, silent, ancient. Albus stood in the ruined circle, trembling slightly, his heart hammering. The ring in his left hand felt heavier than ever, as if it had absorbed the conversation and was now dragging it into him. He looked down at the black stone. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw something moving beneath its surface, an oily shimmer, a suggestion of eyes. He shoved the thought away. Fawkes drifted down, landing on a stone ledge near Albus' shoulder. The phoenix feathers were puffed, tense. The bird pressed its beak gently against Albus' temple, a brief touch that felt like a promise. Albus closed his eyes for a moment. He had gotten what he came for, in the cruelest way possible. Confirmation that Salazar's legacy was not merely history. It was a living seam in the castle, a crack where fear could seep through. And he had learned something else, too. The stone was not a neutral tool. It was not a polite artifact that waited patiently for instructions. It reached. It prodded. It offered precisely what would make you lose your footing. Tonight, it had offered Ariana. Tonight, it had offered the possibility of not dying. Albus felt bile rise in his throat. The thought of how easily he could have said yes made his skin crawl. He wrapped the ring again in the handkerchief, fingers clumsy. His hand shook as he stuffed it into his pocket. The simple act felt like wrestling a sleeping beast back into its cage. Then he looked around the chamber one last time, letting his gaze rest on the 4 carved symbols. Lion.shy, eagle, badger, serpent. 4 vows, Rowena had said. 4 currents. If Salazar's current had been twisted into poison, then Albus would have to strengthen the others until the poison could not spread. It would be slow. It would be unglamorous. It would not satisfy the part of him that wanted decisive battles and clean victories. It would be, Helga would say, practical love. Albus turned toward the passageway, moving carefully, his bandaged hand throbbing. The castle's silence pressed around him as if listening. He whispered, very softly, as if to the stone itself, "I will not let you be his." The walls did not answer. But as he walked, he fancied he felt a subtle shift, like the castle taking note of a promise. The hidden door slid shut behind him with a soft scrape, sealing the undercroft back into the castle's belly. The corridor outside felt almost warm by comparison, though it still held the chill of dawn hours. Albus leaned a shoulder briefly against the wall, letting his weight rest for a heartbeat. His breath came shallow, careful. The curse in his hand pulsed in time with his heartbeat, a reminder that he had not won anything, only delayed. Fawkes shifted on his shoulder, feathers brushing Albus' cheek. The phoenix smelled faintly of smoke and spice, a scent that made Albus think of hearths and safety and things he had not earned. He pushed off from the wall and began walking. Hogwarts was quiet, but not asleep. The castle never truly slept. Somewhere a portrait snored loudly. Somewhere water ran through pipes, whispering. Somewhere a house elf padded along with a mop, unseen and indispensable. Albus moved through the corridors like a man who had stepped out of a dream and was still shaking off its residue. He could feel Salazar's voice lingering in his skull, oily and amused. He could feel Rowena's cold clarity, Helga's warmth, Godric's fierce demand. Tell them, stop using the stone like a crutch. Do not take your loneliness with you. He did not know which instruction felt hardest. By the time he reached the spiral staircase to his office, the windows had begun to pale. The rain had eased into a fine drizzle that made the world look washed out, as if dawn were arriving reluctantly. The gargoyle shifted aside at his approach. Albus did not bother with the password. It seemed to know him by the way he carried his exhaustion. Inside the office, the silver instruments clicked steadily, unaware of the night's drama. The candles still burned, though some had guttered low. Wax pooled thickly beneath them. The portraits were, of course, awake. Phineas's eyes were open, bright with curiosity. Several other faces peered from frames, pretending to be casual. An older witch in one portrait looked scandalized. A stout man with a walrus mustache looked amused. Albus closed the door and drew the wards tight again with a flick of his wand. The portraits muttered in irritation as the magic dampened sound and sight. Phineas, of course, still smiled. "You've been crawling about," Phineas said. "It shows." Albus ignored him. He crossed to the desk and sat, moving carefully as if his bones had become older in the night. He set his bandaged hand on the wood and stared at it. The curse did not hurt less. It simply hurt in a way Albus could tolerate without making noise. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the wrapped ring. For a moment he simply held it, feeling its weight through cloth. He thought of Severus's fury. He thought of the way the stone had used Ariana against him. He thought of Salazar's offer, "Would you like to not die?" and felt nausea roll through him. He could not trust himself with this, not long term. He could not trust anyone with it, perhaps. But the stone was also necessary. Not now, perhaps, but later. There would be a time when it might need to pass to another, when its temptation could become a mercy rather than a trap. Albus's mind flicked, unwillingly, to Harry again. The boy who carried burdens he had never asked for. The boy Albus was grooming in the ugliest sense to do something no child should have to do. His stomach tightened. He stood abruptly, as if movement could keep despair from settling. He paced once, then stopped at the window, staring out at the grounds. The lake was gray and calm now, the storm spent. The forbidden forest was a dark smear at the edge of the world. Hogwarts looked peaceful in the pale light. It always did at dawn. The castle had a talent for pretending innocence. Albus pressed his forehead lightly to the cold glass. He had asked the founders what they intended. He had asked Salazar why. He had learned nothing comforting, but he had learned something useful. Habits, currents, promises repeated until the world remembered them. He straightened and returned to the desk. He pulled a sheet of parchment toward him and dipped his quill into ink. He began to write, not with the grand flourish of a decree, but with the careful, deliberate list of someone planning a garden after a blight. More mixed house lessons. More shared meals, deliberately arranged. An end to certain traditions that encouraged humiliation. A quiet restructuring of the points system, not abolishing it, but changing what earned reward. Ethics taught alongside power. Mentorship that crossed house lines. It was not heroic. It was not dramatic. It was, Helga would say, bread shared. The quill scratched steadily. Phineas watched, eyes narrowed. "Planning," he murmured. "You are always planning." Albus did not look up. "Yes. And will this plan save you?" Phineas asked, voice sharp with a curiosity that might have been something else if he had been capable of it. Albus's quill paused for a heartbeat. "No," he said quietly. "But it may save them." Phineas fell silent, and for once the silence did not feel smug. Fawkes let out a soft croon, almost a lullaby. Albus wrote until his hand cramped, until the ink began to smear slightly where exhaustion made his movements less precise. Then he set the quill down and stared at the ring again. He needed to put it somewhere it would not whisper at him in the night. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small golden snitch, its wings folded tight. It sat in his palm like a captured spark. The snitch was old, scuffed by a boy's first victory years ago. Albus's throat tightened. He turned it over, thumb brushing the faint seam. Not yet, he thought. Not yet. But soon. He closed the drawer gently, leaving the snitch inside. He did not place the ring in it. Not yet. But the decision sat in his mind like a stone laid in place. He took the ring and locked it in a small box of oaken iron, layered with wards that tasted of old spells and stubborn intent. He pushed the box to the back of a cabinet and shut the door. He stood very still, listening to the office, to the ticking instruments, to the soft rustle of portraits shifting, to Fawkes breathing. He realized with a strange clarity that he had been holding his breath for years. He exhaled, and in that exhale he made a quiet vow, not to the dead, not to the stone, not even to the castle, to the living. The dawn did not arrive all at once. It crept, cautious, as if unsure it was welcome. Light seeped into the office in pale bands, turning dust motes into drifting sparks. Albus sat again, suddenly too tired to stand. His shoulders ached. His bandaged hand felt heavy, as if it belonged to someone else. He stared at the parchment covered in his handwriting. Plans were comforting. They gave the illusion that one could arrange the world into safety. And yet, he thought, perhaps illusions were not always lies. Perhaps they were scaffolding, something you built to keep yourself upright while you did the difficult work of making something real. Fawkes began to sing. It was not a loud song. It did not demand attention. It threaded through the air like warmth, like the memory of sunlight on skin after a long winter. It made the office feel less like a war room and more like a home. Albus closed his eyes briefly, letting the sound settle in his chest. He saw, unbidden, the founders again, not their faces so much as their presences. Godric's fierce insistence, Rowena's cold clarity, Helga's practical kindness, and Salazar's oily contempt, lingering like a stain. He opened his eyes and looked at the cabinet that held the ring. He thought of Ariana, the way her shade had asked him to come with her, and the way his heart had tried to obey. He thought of how easily love could become a chain. He would not, he promised himself, let his love make him cruel. He would not, in trying to protect, become the very thing he feared. The office door clicked softly. Albus's gaze snapped up, his body tensing out of instinct. The door opened, and Minerva McGonagall stepped in. Her hair was pulled tight, her tartan robe immaculate, and her expression was set in the particular sternness she wore when she had been worried for hours, and had finally decided that politeness was less important than getting answers. "Albus," Minerva said. Albus swallowed. He had not invited her. She had come because she knew him well enough to recognize the scent of trouble. "Good morning," Albus said mildly, as if he had merely been up early for tea. Minerva's gaze flicked to the stack of parchment, to the ink-stained quill, to the faint sheen of sweat at Albus' temples. Then her eyes narrowed on his bandaged hand. "What have you done?" she asked. Albus held her gaze. Minerva did not frighten easily. He had always respected her for that. "I have made a mistake," Albus said softly. Minerva's mouth tightened. "That is not an answer." "It is the beginning of one," Albus replied. Minerva stepped closer, her eyes sharp as knives. "Your hand," she said. "It looks. Severus has contained it," Albus said quickly. Minerva's gaze sharpened further. "Contained what?" Albus hesitated. He could not tell her everything. Not yet. Secrets were still, unfortunately, part of the war. But he could give her something true. "A curse," Albus said. "From an object I should not have touched." Minerva's nostrils flared slightly. "You touched it anyway." "Yes," Albus admitted. Minerva stared at him for a long moment. Then her shoulders sagged a fraction, and beneath her anger Albus saw something like fear. "You will get yourself killed," Minerva said quietly. Albus smiled, tired. "That is not a new possibility." Minerva's eyes flashed. "Do not be flippant." Albus sobered. "I am not," he said softly. "Minerva, I need you." Minerva blinked, startled by the directness. Albus rarely asked for anything so plainly. "For what?" she demanded, suspicious. Albus gestured to the parchment on the desk. "For this," he said. "For the school." Minerva's gaze dropped to the plans, her expression tightening as she read the first lines. Her eyes moved quickly, taking in the changes, the restructuring, the quiet challenges to tradition. "You're serious," she said, voice low. Albus nodded. "I am." Minerva looked up sharply. "Why now?" Albus met her gaze, and for once did not hide the truth behind gentle deflection. "Because I have been reminded," he said quietly, "that habits become culture, and culture becomes fate if no one interrupts it." Minerva's eyes held his. "Who reminded you?" Albus did not answer that. He simply said, "Someone who mattered." Minerva's mouth tightened. She could smell a secret. She did not like secrets. But she looked down again at the parchment, and something in her expression shifted, the sharpness easing into something more thoughtful. "You'll have resistance," Minerva said. "Practical as ever." "Yes," Albus agreed. "From staff," Minerva continued. "Yes." "From parents," she said, lips thinning. "Yes," Albus said again, and found himself almost amused by the inevitability of it. Minerva tapped a line on the parchment with a finger. "And from the students," she added. Albus's smile softened. "Perhaps," he said, "but perhaps not as much as we fear." Minerva looked at him, eyes narrowing. "You're very tired." Albus leaned back in his chair. "Yes." Minerva's gaze flicked again to his hand. And you're in pain. Albus did not bother denying it. Minerva exhaled sharply through her nose, the sound of someone who had lost an argument before it began and was furious about it. "Fine," she said. "I'll help you, but you will tell me what you touched." Albus's throat tightened. He could not give her the stone. "Not yet. I touched something I should not have," he repeated softly. "And I learned something I should have learned years ago." Minerva's eyes narrowed. "Which is?" Albus looked past her to the window, to the pale grounds, to the castle that held sleeping children. "That I cannot keep trying to control everything alone," he said quietly. Minerva's gaze softened, just a fraction, though her mouth remained stern. "Good," she said. "Because you're dreadful at it." Albus laughed softly, and the sound surprised him. It sounded almost like himself. Fawkes' song threaded through the moment like a blessing. Minerva looked at the phoenix, then back at Albus. "Now," she said, "drink something, eat something, and for Merlin's sake, sleep." Albus's smile was faint. "Yes," he said, and meant to try. Minerva gathered the parchment, stacking it neatly. "I'll make copies," she said briskly. "And we'll begin with something small, something they can't argue with too loudly." Albus watched her, warmth stirring in him. Practical love. Bread shared. Work done. Minerva paused at the door, hand on the handle. She looked back at him, her expression suddenly very serious. "Albus," she said quietly. "Yes?" Minerva's eyes held his. "Don't die." Albus felt his throat tighten. He did not trust himself to speak for a moment. Then he nodded once. "I will try," he said softly. Minerva left. The door clicked shut. Albus sat alone again, but the loneliness felt less absolute. He looked toward the cabinet. He could still feel the ring's weight in the building, even locked away. It was a presence, a lure, a reminder that death and temptation had a key to his mind. He did not reach for it. Instead, he pulled a fresh piece of parchment toward him and began writing letters. Not to the dead, to the living. Ink bled into parchment in steady lines. Albus wrote to the heads of house first, careful in tone, firm in intent. He wrote to the kitchen, requesting changes to the seating arrangement that would seem on the surface like an experiment in school spirit. He wrote to the librarian, requesting certain texts be moved from restricted shelves into supervised access. Not because knowledge should be forbidden, but because knowledge without guidance could be as dangerous as ignorance. He wrote to the board, phrasing reforms as improvements rather than revolutions, because adults were easier to manipulate than children. They clung to ego and called it principle. His hand shook slightly as he wrote. The curse pulsed. He ignored it. Occasionally, his mind drifted toward the undercroft, toward the hiss in the stone. When it did, he forced his thoughts back to the paper. He would not feed that memory. He would not let it become fascination. A faint scrape sounded from one of the portraits. Albus looked up. Phineas's eyes were open again. His expression was less amused than before, though he would have denied any softer emotion if asked. "You're changing things," Phineas said, as if this were a crime. Albus met his gaze. "Yes." Phineas's lips curled. "The school has endured for centuries without your meddling." Albus's smile was tired. "The school has endured," he agreed. "The children have not always." Phineas's gaze sharpened. "Sentimental." "Practical," Albus corrected, hearing Helga's voice in his head. Phineas snorted softly. "Practical is usually the excuse for tyranny." Albus's eyes narrowed slightly. "And tradition is usually the excuse for laziness." Phineas blinked, surprised. Then he laughed, quietly, despite himself. Albus returned to his letters. As the sun rose higher, the castle began to stir. Somewhere below, a door opened and closed. Somewhere, footsteps echoed. The first of the day's voices drifted upward like smoke. Albus felt the world returning, reclaiming the hours he had stolen for ghosts and secrets. He glanced, once toward the cabinet. The urge to open it came suddenly, sharp and irrational like thirst. He could almost feel the ring in his palm again. Could almost feel the stone's cold promise. One more question, it seemed to whisper. One more look. One more certainty. Albus's breath hitched. He stood abruptly, chair scraping, and crossed the room to the cabinet with a purpose that felt like someone else. His fingers touched the handle. For a heartbeat, he froze. He saw Ariana again. Not as she had appeared in the mist, but as she had been. Small, laughing, running through grass. He felt the old longing rise, thick and sweet. He imagined suddenly Godric's fierce gaze, Rowena's cold accusation, Helga's gentle disappointment, and Severus's voice. No. Albus exhaled slowly. He released the handle. He turned away from the cabinet as if it were a fire he had nearly stepped into. He returned to the desk and sat again, hands shaking. He wrote one more letter. This one was not to staff or board or ministry. It was to Harry. He did not mention Horcruxes. Not yet. But he invited the boy to accompany him soon, to learn, to understand, to prepare, not as a soldier, Albus promised himself, but as a person who deserved truth. He sealed the letter with wax, pressing his signet ring into it with his left hand because his right could not. As he held the envelope, Albus felt a sudden, fierce tenderness toward the child who had already endured more than most adults. He also felt guilt, sharp as ever, because tenderness did not erase what Albus was asking of him. He placed the letter on a stack to be sent. Fawkes let out a soft croon, and Albus looked up. The phoenix eyes were bright, steady, not judging, simply present. Albus found himself speaking aloud, quietly, to the bird, to the empty room, to the unseen castle. "I will not use the dead to escape the living," he said. The words were a vow and a warning. Outside, the sun climbed. The world did not pause. Albus picked up his quill again. Minerva returned later than Albus expected, which meant she had worked quickly and argued with at least one person along the way. She pushed into the office with a stack of neatly copied parchments tucked under her arm, her expression carved into the particular severity she wore when she had decided something would happen whether the world liked it or not. "I've spoken to Pomona," Minerva said without preamble. "She's delighted. Filius thinks it's an intriguing social experiment. He's already making jokes about it." Albus smiled faintly. "And Severus?" Minerva's lips thinned. "Severus thinks everything is an insult," she said. But he didn't say no. That, Albus thought, was practically an endorsement. Minerva set the parchments on the desk with a firm thump. "You'll have pushback from some of the older families," she said. "They like their children sorted into the correct little boxes. Makes it easier to plan marriages." Albus's smile did not reach his eyes. "Yes," he murmured. "It does." Minerva looked at him sharply, as if hearing something darker beneath his tone. "Are you all right?" Albus hesitated. He was not. But honesty had its own timing. "I am managing," he said. Minerva's eyes narrowed. "That is not the same thing." Albus offered her a tired smile. "No." Minerva's gaze flicked again to his bandaged hand. "Has Severus?" "Yes," Albus said gently. "He has done what can be done." Minerva's expression tightened. "And what you touched?" Albus held her gaze. "Not today," he said softly. Minerva's jaw clenched. She did not like being kept out. But she also, Albus knew, understood war better than most. "Fine," Minerva said curtly. "But you will tell me before this kills you." Albus's throat tightened. He nodded once. Minerva exhaled, a sharp sound, then straightened. "All right," she said briskly, shifting back into action. "We start with meals. We'll rearrange the tables for a week. Frame it as Founders Week. A little history, a little pageantry. Students like pageantry." Albus felt the twist of irony. Founders Week. If Minerva knew the founders had stood in this very office hours ago, she would likely hex him into next month. "Excellent," Albus said. Minerva's gaze flicked to the cabinet, then back to Albus, suspicion flickering. "What's in there?" Albus's pulse jumped. He kept his expression mild. "Paperwork," he said. Minerva's eyes narrowed. "You are lying." Albus's smile softened. Apology and affection tangled. "Yes." Minerva stared at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head, sharp and frustrated. But there was something else in it too. Resignation, perhaps, or trust. One day, Minerva said, "Your secrets will choke you." Albus swallowed. "I know." Minerva's mouth tightened. "Try not to let them choke the school with you." Albus's gaze steadied. "I won't," he said softly. Minerva nodded once, briskly. "Good." She turned to go, then paused. "And Albus?" "Yeah." Minerva's eyes held his. "You were right," she said, grudging but honest. "Habits become culture." Albus felt warmth stir. Small, but real. "Yes," he murmured. Minerva left again, the door closing firmly behind her like a promise. Albus sat for a long moment, listening to the office. The castle was louder now, awake. Voices drifted faintly through stone. Somewhere a student laughed, the sound bright and careless. Albus's chest tightened. He reached, not for the cabinet, but for the parchment again. He added one more line to his plan. Inter-house mentorship, beginning with older students guiding younger ones in practical magic, cooking charms, mending spells, healing basics. Not glamorous. Useful. He could almost hear Helga approving. He could almost hear Rowena critiquing the curriculum. He could almost hear Godric demanding courage. And faintly, like a stain that refused to scrub out, he could almost hear Salazar's hiss. "Stone remembers." Yes, Albus thought. But so do people. When the office emptied and the day's machinery began to grind in earnest, Albus allowed himself one final quiet moment. He opened the drawer again and looked at the snitch. The small object gleamed faintly, catching sunlight like captured dawn. Its wings were still, folded tight. He did not touch it at first. He simply stared, letting the weight of what he planned settle. He would not put the ring into it today. Perhaps not tomorrow. But the decision had been made in his bones. One day when the time came, the stone would have to leave him. Not for power. Not for temptation. For mercy. He closed the drawer gently. His bandaged hand throbbed, a steady reminder that his body was already keeping its own schedule. He flexed his fingers carefully. The curse answered with a pulse like a cold laugh. Albus looked out the window at Hogwarts. In daylight, the castle looked almost benevolent. Sunlight gilded the stone, softened the edges, made the towers seem like something built for wonder rather than defense. Students moved like small dark dots on the grounds, heading to breakfast, to class, to whatever small dramas filled a morning when you were young and the world had not yet demanded war of you. Albus watched them, and something in him eased, just slightly. He thought of the founders again, not their glory, but their flaws, their arguments, their regrets. The way even they, with all their power, had failed to stop a man like Salazar from leaving poison in the walls. He thought, too, of how they had built something that still sheltered children centuries later. Perhaps that was the truth of it. Greatness was not purity. It was persistence. It was building despite knowing you would make mistakes. Albus turned away from the window and crossed the office. He stopped at the cabinet that held the oak box. For a heartbeat, his hand hovered near the door. He felt the stones pull like a whisper at the base of his skull. One more look. One more question. One more voice. Albus closed his eyes. He saw Ariana in his mind, not as the stone had offered her, but as she truly was now. He did not know where. He did not know how. But he knew, with a quiet clarity, that the dead did not exist to soothe the living's guilt. He opened his eyes and stepped away from the cabinet. "No," he said softly, not to anyone in the room, but to himself. Fawkes let out a low, approving croon. Albus returned to the desk and sat. He lifted his quill. The ink was black and honest. The parchment waited, patient. Outside, Hogwarts breathed. Inside, the office held its secrets, but Albus began, finally, to loosen his grip on them, not all at once, not dramatically, but in the steady, unglamorous way that changed habits. He wrote, and as the words formed, the castle listened, not to a founder's echo, not to a stone's hunger, but to a living man choosing, again and again, to build something kinder than fear.